Do you remember a game that had such negative reception everywhere you look and you yourself felt that you're the only one who liked it? We all experience at least one game, and for me, that game I would believe is the most severely underrated would be the 2009 reboot of Bionic Commando, developed by Grin and published by Capcom. Yes, remember this game during the early years of the 6th generation of consoles? Well, one of the first game based on Capcom IP that will be made by a Western studio outside of Capcom. How it tries to be gritty and realistic of a reboot based on a lesser known franchise from the 80s that would eventually go on a lot of mediocre reviews and sold badly. Why, Chem, you might ask, would you even like this game enough to publicly defend it after 10 years of obscurity and bad reception? Well, to be honest, I didn't expect this game to be good. Once I bought it recently, just like what I heard from others, I expected it to be bad. But I ended up really liking it. I genuinely believe this is one of the best action games I played in years. I'm 100% serious. But Chem, if you claim this game is so good, then why has it gotten so much mixed reception when it first came out? No, this isn't one of those stupid conspiracy theories that I use to villainize my competition, that is reviews on different websites such as IGN and GameSpot, for being incompetent or lying just because they have different opinions than me so I can manipulate people to watch my reviews so I can make more money. I'm not a genius, but I'm not that stupid.
Last time I talked about game critics, they had an embarrassing meltdown on Twitter, then they plagiarized this guy's review, and there were gamers out here defending Metal Gear Survive because we as a species are doomed to fail.
Video game donkey.
Kenny, what kind of douchebag garbage are you watching?
Throughout the 80s, 90s, mid-2000s, Japan has ruled the video game industry from consoles to arcade to game themselves. One of those companies that had a big part in it was Capcom, and they have started their conquest for the gaming domination from the arcade scene in the 80s to eventually branching off to console and occasionally PC game development, from the multi-million earner from Street Fighter to the smash hit of horror from Resident Evil, and who could even forget about their popular Mega Man series that defined the company the most. Capcom was king of the world until they start to sink. By the time with the 7th generation of consoles with the PS3, Xbox 360 and Nintendo Wii, Capcom was not only starting to struggle, the entire Japanese gaming industry was struggling too. The home market back in Japan wasn't interested in the PS3, despite the PS2 being a smash success, which limited these studios' options. But hey, there's the Western market that loved Japanese games anyway, so there isn't a problem. Oh wait, never mind, because Western games are even more popular than Japanese games for the first time in decades, and they're holding a tight grip to the gaming media's attention. And standards had changed this time as the Japanese games were getting more and more criticism from publication and audiences for being outdated, and the game design being way too similar to the last generations of games, with better graphics instead of just evolving with the times. Capcom themselves were even criticized by their own employees inside the company. To be more accurate, their own Kenji Inafune, who publicly criticized the entire Japanese gaming industry for being behind the times compared to the Western developers, and relying way too much on old IPs instead of creating new ones to innovate. Especially Capcom, who was at the time delaying on making sequels rather than making their new games instead. For companies like Capcom, they had at least 3 options of what to do in this situation. They could keep doing what they're familiar with, but the risk would be getting even bigger negative reception and would risk losing sales. The second option would be attempting to be similar to Western games, just like Inafune would have wanted, but that would mean opening up to another can of worms. There would be even a risk to make changes that could have the potential to alienate your own audiences that were used to your previous games, and it would be a risk to sales too. Or the final option to win back the Western market? Just do option 2, but hire someone else to do it for you. And that's where we meet Grin in this story. Grin was the Western studio Capcom wanted, based in Sweden, and also known for other games that doesn't matter to this video. Today, in a team up of 2 companies from the land of East and West, we can finally get the game that used to exist in the dreams of Capcom fans for years, and that would be a reboot of Bionic Commando? Yeah, remember that game on the NES that is all about being a soldier with a biomechanical arm to swing onto platforms and infiltrate and kill Nazis? Yes, I said Nazis. The original title of the game was called Hitler's Resurrection Top Secret. It was about the Nazis trying to resurrect Adolf Hitler himself. It was obviously censored in North American and European versions by Nintendo of America themselves to avoid controversy. But they didn't do a good job of it, as the famous head explosion scene was uncensored in the Western version of the game. The game itself isn't my cup of tea, but I do respect it being a classic, just like any other beloved 8-bit Capcom game. But now, decades later, the series is finally back with a new studio to bring it to the 21st century. But why do I like Bionic Commando? Well, it's simple. It's so much fun!
Yes, I know it's unexpected.
Access granted.
What the? This is gonna hurt.
The iconic swinging mechanic that is known in the series is better than ever in the 3rd dimension. The system now works with physics, with momentum to properly fly around just like a modern 3D Spider-Man game. But instead of the web's head, great responsibility and jazz, old Spencer here used guns and minicam to take out his foes, and you could do it while swinging to avoid damages from his enemies. And you definitely need to move around, because if you play like a generic 3rd-person cover shooter, like most games at the time, you will easily get outmaneuvered and outgunned and dead. There's a healthy mix of variety from enemies, from the common enemy soldier, to mobile attack helicopters, to fast robots that can even smash you to a pulp if you're not careful. With quick planning and momentum is needed to win. This may sound pretty normal for an action game these days thanks to the popularity of Vanquish, Doom 2016 and Titanfall. But let's remember that Bionic Commando came out before all of these and sticks out like a thumb in the familiar formulaic sludge of slow cover-based shooters that people were used to at the time. But the swinging and guns aren't the only feature of combat. There's also the throwing mechanic, which requires to grapple onto an object to fling at your enemies like they're nothing. It's a useful tactic to take down groups of small fries and also taking out bigger threats as well. There's the melee combat as well, such as the aerial jump attack to take out small enemies quick, and the simple swing of Spencer arms to take out fools. But even with all your tools available to you, the game is surprisingly tough and demanding. Speaking of levels, the design of them are great. While the game is an open world and it is linear by using the excuse of radiation and deep pools to kill Spencer easily, the levels are spacious, not only on the ground, but verticality. What makes the level design work is that almost anything can be grappled onto close enough to move around so players can travel around in their own pace. So with the amazing, addictive gameplay out of the way, what about the story and presentation? Well, Bionic Commando, for those who aren't familiar, is a simple story of Rad Spencer, later changed to Nathan Spencer, who single-handedly infiltrate the evil Imperial Army to save his mentor, Super Joe. It's the 80s, don't question it, and take down the leader of the Imperials. It's a simple plot for a side-scroller for an NES game in 1998, but what makes it interesting about Bionic Commando Reboot is that it isn't a reboot, it's a sequel. Yes, this much more serious, realistic story is taking the original plot of an 8-bit game very seriously. Like, instead of shade-wearing 80s action hero Spencer we know before, Spencer's a much more darker, serious anti-hero, being jailed for 5 years for being a bionic soldier, and being forced by his own government that jailed him to infiltrate and fight the Imperials again. You think the narrative wouldn't work well, but surprisingly, for me at least, it is done a lot better than I expected. The story takes a simplistic black and white storyline of the arcade and NES game and expands the world of the characters to fit in with a new setting and tone. Time has changed in the reboot, and the characters featured in the original story changed a lot, especially Spencer, who's him and the other bionic soldiers hired by the military to fight in the war, has now been oppressed and feared due to their new set of powers. The new villains, who are yes ex-Imperials again, but this time recruited by actual bionic veterans who become terrorists who kill millions in their attack of the belief to fight for bionic rights.
Oh, move!
Spencer? It's you. I heard those scumbags in the government executed you. What are you doing here?
I could ask you the same question, Mag, but I'm afraid I already know the answer.
You don't know anything about me.
I sure as hell don't know who taught you to pull a gun on a ranking officer!
It's been a long time since I served under you and your superiors.
Instead, you work for terrorists, and I work for myself.
That says differently. They may have given you your arm back, but the government treated the rest of us like machines.
They tried to dismantle us like we were faulty merchandise. We are human beings, damn it!
And the people in this city, what were they?
We have a right to fight back. Taking away my legs would have been taking away my
So
life.
you trade millions of lives for your own?
How many people would have ended up in wheelchairs because some government fearmonger is afraid of a new technology?
You deserve a chair, Mag! But the one I'm thinking of doesn't have wheels. You're no freedom fighter. You're just like me, a killer.
It's obvious it took a lot of inspiration from the real-life political event around the same time of the game's development and release. It's no speck up the line levels of political commentary and dissection, but I respect Grin for taking the risk to deal with a much heavier subject matter, and mostly succeeding with it. But Bionic Commando isn't perfect. I think the storytelling is relying way too much on expositional dialogue instead of just showing us what happened, like the supposed Bionic Purge that is told numerous amount of times but wasn't shown. I do think that Spencer's storyline of wanting to find his wife is pretty weak, so they never had much focus on the story besides a few cutscenes. The graphics are pretty standard for what you expect to an early to mid 7th gen game at the time, but at least the performance in the PC version is great. It's a lot more colourful than most games at the time. Also, the later levels of the game are an absolute piss take on how much enemies the levels contain, especially giant flying robots that take numerous throws or get taken down, like screw them! Even after all that, I still would enjoy Bionic Commando for being a great game. I don't think it would rival in the quality to say Devil May Cry or Bayonetta or anything, but I would say it's a lot better than most people realize, and people really need to give this game a chance. It's a shame that Grin closed its door after the game bombed, because I see so much opportunity to add new features and improvement to make the game's sequel to be even more amazing in comparison. It seems like Capcom disowned the game after it sold horribly years ago, and is sitting on a massive opportunity to make a legendary action game franchise off of it. Yeah, sure, there is a sequel to a spin-off throwback game, Bionic Commando Rearmed 2, developed by Fat Shark, who house actual ex-Grin employees, but it isn't enough. I hope Capcom or a hired developer would take the blueprints made by Grin to make the ultimate action game that could stand toe-to-toe with God of War, Bayonetta, Vanquish, and DMC. Hell, in the age of Shenmue 3, DMC 5, Lost Guardian, and Kingdom Hearts 3 existing when we all thought it wouldn't, anything can happen. Well, I'm Chem the Chameleon, signing out.